Hi, I'm Joseph Mullinger, an 11th grade Mountain Brook virtual student all year due to the COVID-19 worldwide pandemic. This is my final assessment in Miss Mark's English 11 class. Using the book The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, I will address 5 prompts, share meaningful music, and end on my reflection as a virtual student. For the required prompt that addresses the elements of voice, I chose chapter 19 entitled Field Trip. O'Brien has taken his daughter on a trip to Vietnam, and he shows her the place where Kiowa died. It's a significant place to him, but she does not fully understand. Analyzing for elements of voice, diction, detail, syntax, imagery, and tone. Imagery is found on page 173, except for a few marshy spots along the river. Everything was bone dry. O'Brien uses imagery to show us how he sees this place using clear, concise details so the reader is able to visualize the images in their mind. Diction is found on page 178. I wanted to tell Kiowa that he'd been a great friend, the very best, but all I could do was slap hands with the water. This quote used diction concisely to get O'Brien's point across at the difficulty in expressing emotions. Detail, syntax, and tone are found on page 173, where O'Brien states, I stood with my arms folded, feeling the grip of sentiment and time. Amazing, I thought, 20 years. This quote is full of detail. In only 18 words, O'Brien uses complex syntax to add meaning and voice to the story. Tone is expression of attitude. In this quote, O'Brien conveys a weary yet factual tone to find closure 20 years after the war has ended. For my second prompt, I chose question 1. O'Brien addresses courage and cowardice throughout much of the book. A good example is in chapter 4 entitled On the Rainy River, where he writes, Even in my imagination, the shore just 20 yards away, I couldn't make myself be brave. It had nothing to do with morality. Embarrassment, that's all it was. And right then, I submitted. I would go to war. I would kill and maybe die because I was embarrassed not to. I think his definition of courage is holding onto your convictions and letting your convictions guide you. He looks upon his decision to follow the draft and join the army as an act of cowardice. He considers it brave to run to Canada and follow his conviction, whereas most people think of it as brave to fight in the war. My definition of courage is probably the textbook definition of courage. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, courage is mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. Thinking about it though, I think courage is a gift of the Holy Spirit, and this gift has a special name called fortitude. It's one of the 7 virtues, and it is a cardinal virtue from the Holy Spirit, and it allows us to do good things. According to Catholic.com, the gift of courage would take one beyond the usual measure of confronting threats to a higher ability to confront evils according to a divine standard. For my third prompt, I chose question 5. O'Brien uses storytelling to teach the reader about Vietnam. In the chapter Notes, O'Brien uses his voice to write about Bowker, who does not have the capacity for storytelling. Bowker thought his girlfriend was going to be disgusted and never shared his story. He thought his father was going to be disinterested and never shared his story. He thought about telling 4 railway workers, but never did. He even started to tell the sonic waiter his story unsuccessfully. Bowker is locked in his own story, alone. Page 152 reads, By telling stories, you objectify your own experience. You separate it from yourself. You pin down certain truths. You make up others. O'Brien uses his voice in writing, while Bowker was not able to use his voice in real life. O'Brien wants the reader to see the story truth instead of the happening truth. He uses storytelling to get the reader to feel the story truth. When O'Brien says, stories can save you, he means that stories are a way of conveying feeling and emotion to others and getting feeling and emotion from others. Without that give and take, Bowker feels alone and eventually commits suicide. If he had been able to share his story, would it have saved him? For my fourth prompt, I chose question 6. Several themes are central to the book. The theme I chose to defend with textual evidence is war is complex. Even in its complexity, there is a spectrum between the meaningless and the meaningful. There are lessons to be learned, emotional connections to be made. There is a story, but it is complex. Along the way, there is chaos and disorganization. For example, a church as a central battle headquarters in the chapter entitled Church, a pantyhose as a source of courage or protection in the chapter entitled Stockings, the Vietnamese girl dancing in the middle of a war zone in the chapter entitled Style. This novel is seemingly random chaos with absurd juxtapositions to show that it was difficult to make meaning out of this war. This war in Vietnam is complex. O'Brian drives home this point when he mentions Kiowa in 4 separate chapters near the end of the book, where O'Brian makes a return visit to Vietnam 20 years after the conflict to find closure and meaning. This is O'Brian's way of trying to convey a central theme that war is complex, even 20 years after the war has ended. My fifth prompt is question 11. In the chapter Good Form, O'Brian says, I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to know why story truth is truer sometimes than happening truth. O'Brian's happening truth is the what happened. It's the objective and the lack of feeling truth. O'Brian's story truth is the why it happened. It's the subjective feeling truth. In chapter 1, O'Brian has a happening truth list of what the guys actually carried. Some things all soldiers carried, but some things were unique to specific soldiers. Ultimately, what they carry are the story truth list: burdens, guilt, loss, death, fear, remorse, haunting. I think story truth is truer than happening truth. Story truth has an emotional investment that makes it more meaningful. It is more thorough and complete. It causes reaction, emotion, and gives more feeling to the story. The following song was written in 2018 for Gun Control and sung as a mashup of 2 popular songs, You Will Be Found from the musical Dear Evan Hansen and The Story of Tonight from the musical Hamilton. I reworked it for one person. This is story truth. It's a meaningful visual and auditory tool as we contemplate the book, the things they carried, Vietnam, and veterans. It could be meaningful to anyone who has a story truth.
We may not yet have reached our glory, but I will gladly join the fight. And when our children tell their story, they'll tell the story of tonight. They'll tell the story of tonight. Tonight.
There's no way I could have known then how much that piece would mean to me now. It relates to the book, the Vietnam War, and my time as a virtual student. Like the required prompt where O'Brian used his voice, I was able to learn how to better use my voice during this virtual year. Like my second prompt, question 1, where O'Brian felt it would have been courageous to go to Canada, I feel courageous that I stood by the science and my convictions and did a year of virtual learning in hopes of saving just one life. Like my third prompt, where O'Brian finds story truth, I've learned that I have a story, and it's not just the happening truth. It's the story truth. It is my story truth. Like my fourth prompt, question 6, where one of the central themes of the book is war is complex, I think life is complex. This includes COVID. This includes virtual school. It's all complex. I'm proud of our courage to teach and learn virtually during this complex year. Finally, like my fifth prompt, question 11, where O'Brian wants you to feel what he felt, I hope my video expresses and encourages you to feel what I felt this past year. Thank you to all my teachers for your support.